Now we have another wonderful storyteller, Richard Finkelstein. I did it. I had it right last time. I'm sorry. Let's start over. Richard Finkelstein. He's a psychologist and storyteller originally from New Jersey who gets outdoors in Vermont as much as he is able. And when we asked Richard what was his favorite holiday food, he said that he would eat latkes as much as he was able, especially with sour cream. Let's give Richard a round of applause.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And before I begin, I want to thank Dina Frankel for doing this whole event and giving me this opportunity to tell my story. So this is a winter tale. I want you to get cozy and kind of warm and cuddle up. We're expecting snow tomorrow. And so I want you to picture me. I was 8 years old. I was coming home from a sleepover. I was half asleep, and on the way home, I opened my eyes, and I realized I was surrounded by snow. Because what had happened is that overnight, there had been a snowstorm. And when I went to bed, it wasn't snowing. When I woke up, it was sunny, but all around me was this huge amount of snow. It was piled all around me, and I was a little boy, and it just knocked me off my feet. All this white stuff. Well, this was up in Quebec, in La Belle Provence, where I was born and raised. And I spent my first 30 years there. Winter kind of was the main experience for me as a kid. It's part of the cultural landscape in Quebec. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to sing a folk song for you in French to get the mood going. This is a really well-known folk song, and I'm just going to sing a couple of lines, and I'm going to translate it. Although we're all Vermonters in northern areas, we should know French. Mon pays, ce n'est pas un pays, c'est l'hiver. Mon chemin, ce n'est pas un chemin, c'est la neige. Do you know this song? By Gilles Viau. Gilles Viau is a Quebecer, a chanteur. Some people feel that if Quebec was independent, this would be their national anthem. My country is not a country, it's winter. The road is not a road, it's snow. And guess what? It's a poem. It captures the cultural mood in Quebec in winter, and it's exactly what I experienced as a kid. I'm not a Quebecois. I'm an American right now. I'm an Anglo, but I was overwhelmed by snow when I was a little boy. I got to know snow really well. I watched it. I watched the wind play with it. I got to know how snow smells at about 25 below zero. Snow actually does smell in a storm when it's coming down at a certain temperature. I got to know what snow feels like underfoot. And I was kind of stoned as a kid. I spent just a lot of time outside. And I should also kind of mention sledding and skiing on snow, because I found that, wow, it was really a trip to learn how to move on snow. And these were days when there was no snowmaking, there was nothing. It was just a pair of wooden skis without edges. You strap them on, and off you go. And I discovered that I learned a lot from the movement on snow. It was kind of like a sort of a learning about myself that was also through the body that I've never forgotten. So you've got it, right? Now you know me, and you know what happened to me as a kid in Quebec. I was kind of like a snow guy. And this sounds like an idyllic life, and it was. And a big event occurred at a certain point, which is I met my soulmate. Yeah, I met the love of my life. And everything was great, you know, except that she wasn't a Quebecer. She wasn't from La Belle Provence. She wasn't even from Vermont or from the north. She was from Flatbush in Brooklyn, New York, which meant that we shared a very different cultural experience. Our cultural backgrounds were different, no less valuable, but she was not a creature of the north. But she did want to escape Brooklyn. People in the 70s were leaving New York. They're all flooding into New York and Brooklyn now, but in the 70s, people were leaving Brooklyn. And I said, let's head north. Well, She didn't know what she was in for. We bypassed Montreal and went up to a cottage that my grandparents, oh, this, by the way, was December. It was probably right around this time of year in 1972. Off we went up north in the Laurentians to a little town, a little village called Ivry-sur-le-Lac. Ivry-sur-le-Lac, anybody know where that is? Yeah, Ivry-sur-le-Lac. It's about 10 miles north of Saint-Agathe-des-Monts, and Saint-Agathe is about 60 miles north of Montreal. So we're about 70 miles north. I took Linda up there one winter day in a snowstorm. Everything I'm telling you is the truth. And this was a raging snowstorm, and we got stuck a few times, and we finally made it up to the cottage, but we got stuck before we made it up there and trudged up the hill. And that evening, as often happens in Quebec in a snowstorm, it cleared out. The temperature plummeted. We think it was 25 below zero. I took Linda for a walk outside, and we marveled at how beautiful it was in that cool air. It wasn't cool, it was ice cold. The next morning, Linda and I stood together looking out on the Quebec wilderness. There was 2 feet of snow on the ground, blowing snow, drifting. It was 20 below zero, and we both looked at an objective reality. It was the same picture. But guess what? We each saw something different. I was looking out the window, and I was already outside. I was in the snow. I was figuring out what that snow would be like and whether I'd be skiing or snowshoeing and what I'd be doing with it. I was already outside, although if you looked at me, I was physically still inside. Linda had a completely different cultural experience, and so therefore she saw something completely different. If I had to sum it up, it would be something like, is there a museum open today? And I don't say that in one way is better than the other way. Each is just different. Winter in Quebec, like it is here, is a complete transformation, and it's a permanent one. And you go into a museum, it's still going to be there when you get out. So, and the other thing was that winter was different. As I was looking at it, and I was standing beside Linda, not only was our view of winter each different, but my view also subtly changed. Winter seemed a little further away from me at that moment because of my relationship with Linda. And so if you can imagine it, if you took a ruler and you actually measured the distance between me and the outside, it was the same distance, but because Linda was standing there, the distance got just a little bit larger. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but it's not something that you can actually measure objectively, it just kind of happens. Now, you're probably thinking, what happened over the next 50 years? Because it's going to be 50 years that we're together in a year or two. And 48? Okay. Oh, is it 40? Okay. Okay. I got my math. So what has actually happened is that over these 50 years, we've spent a lot of time standing together, looking out at landscapes. Linda and I have looked at a lot of winter together. And even to this day, when we look at it, we still see something different. And by the way, I've spent a lot of time with Linda looking at New York and even looking at Flatbush. I even took her to Coney Island before we migrated to Vermont so I could have one last experience there. But a lot of times looking at winter. And gradually, even though our cultures are different, and different, as you now know, in an extremely important way, sometimes Linda sees the winter that I see. And actually, just a couple of weeks ago, we were going up to St. Albans for Thanksgiving, and it was a snowy Thanksgiving, and it was a huge amount of snow up north of St. Albans, and we trekked our way and to our friend's house, and our friend got stuck, and Linda and I got out, got our boots and hats and gloves on. We shoved this car out of a ditch, and then we walked uphill through the snow, and it was cold with our boots and hats and gloves, and Linda had a twinkle in her eye, and she looked at me and she said, "It's just like Ivry." See, she was channeling winter. And so I was dedicating this story to all of us who stand next to each other, who all, because of our backgrounds, are seeing the world differently, and how important it is to keep looking and to keep learning from each other and to keep understanding each other's perspective. Thank you.